So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. So my name is Yukiko. I work for World Vision as Senior Advisor for Livelihoods Programming and External Engagement. I'm honored to be the moderator for the session today. So this is the last opportunity to get together before the pre-summit. So we are hoping to give you the latest updates and also get your feedback and inputs and questions. So the session today follows the same agenda as the previous ones. In the first segment, we will hear key messages from Dr. Agnes Kalibata, UN Food Systems Summit Special Envoy, and Martin Frick, UNFSS Deputy Envoy on Summit Outcomes, Deliverables, and Vision of Success. Then in the second part, we will hear the updates on the Summit Dialogues, then updates from the levers of change and the action tracks. Then we will hear about the pre-summit updates. Then we'll move on to the open Q&A sessions. So now we can start. And Dr. Kalibata, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Yukiko. And thank you so much again for organizing to the colleagues here that really did a lot of work behind the scenes to ensure that this dialogue happens, for organizing yet another great dialogue that brings us all together. I'm particularly excited because this is one of the last dialogues that we'll be having that recognizes the amount of work that has gone into really getting together, having conversations. But I'm also excited because civil society has really stayed the course. We called this a People's Summit. We came to this as really recognizing that we need to put people front and center. And civil society has done one really amazing thing, ensuring that the issues that they're most worried about, that people are worried about, are brought out. Representing these issues has been extremely important for us to hear them, but also for the rest of the world to hear them. And I'll call out just a few from our last 3 or 4 meetings that stuck with me. The 3 or 4 issues that you called out the most, that you're most worried about, of course, corporate accountability. This is something that has come out a number of times from different places. And yes, given the level of inequity in our systems, you have every reason to worry about that. You've called for ensuring that agroecology and restorative agriculture is at the center of food systems as we go forward. And given where our world is, we do recognize the centrality of this. We do recognize the need to want to do something. The fact that you're really, really worried about ensuring that we do something about where our ecosystem, our food ecosystem is going. But you also call out and keep to call out the issue of human rights, that this whole conversation be anchored in human rights. And in particular, you've called out the participation of Indigenous people. And I want to assure you that in these last few months of summit process, we've had 280 engagements, dialogues, independent dialogues with Indigenous people, bringing hundreds of thousands of people in dialogues. So yes, when you call out these issues, it's extremely important because people listen. And I tell you the truth, the summit has been listening. That's why we doubled down on some of these efforts that you talked about. I want to highlight that given COVID-19, given where things are at today, we can't really start relaxing or resting. We need to even double down further and call out a few more issues. One of the things that stand out, again, I'll call out 3 here. One of the most important is the whole issue of inequity that sits amidst us, and COVID-19 has highlighted this, and it's not going away anytime soon. So we probably need to double down and really start underscoring what needs to be done to ensure that this is one of the things that needs to be addressed. The next one is urgency and the sense with which we approach this last decade of action that some people are calling the decade of implementation. So the urgency with which we approach it becomes extremely important, because right now we are not doing very well. We knew that from the beginning, but things have gone worse with COVID. And then the last one is to really ensure that we underscore the urgency of the food system transformation. Through these conversations, we've heard it all. We understand what is at stake, and we need to keep doubling down to ensure that everybody everywhere understands what is at stake. And what is at stake is for us to reduce inequity. What's at stake is for us to come through on SDGs. What is at stake is for us to start thinking about the critical transitions that our food systems needs to have. So you continue representing those issues, and you really are putting people front and center, and we're extremely proud of the work that you're doing. So I look forward to this conversation. I look forward to being part of this, as always, to learn from you. And I look forward, I think this is probably one of the last meetings we'll be having ahead of the pre-summit. I look forward to the pre-summit and your engagement, and ensuring that you stay on course, you stay with the issues here, and ensure that the most important things are brought out. So thank you again, and thank you all for giving me an opportunity to talk to you. Over to you again, Yukiko.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalibata, for your strong message, and also the encouragement for this participation and working together. So I now pass the microphone to Martin. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yukiko, Special Envoy. We have a couple of slides for you to show you progress, what has happened since our last meeting, and I would ask Sam to put on the slides, please. And the next one, please. So this is where we are in July, where all of our different engagement areas are really coming together. We have the scientific group and its modeling work, and in a couple of minutes, really, the presentation of the new SOFI report, and having had a sneak preview, it doesn't look good. We have the beginning of coalitions in our areas of convergence, and I will speak more about that in a second. We have an amazing number of national pathways coming up, and David Navarro is with us and will speak more about that. We have different engagement programs, dialogues, all sorts of specialized events in which we are looking into what's coming out from constituencies. And we have a broad communication effort running with our food system heroes, all meant to really have a people-centered summit, to hear what people are really thinking about their food systems, what the obstacles are, what the perspectives are. Now at the pre-summit, which is now imminent, it will start in exactly 2 weeks, we want to show all of these areas coming together. We are looking into maybe having a first set of 5 coalitions as tone setters launched, having some heads of states, eminent person to really raise the bar and the political energy for our food system transformation work. From there to September, when the summit moment will be, we are refining the statement of action and a nexus. I will be coming to that. We will be building more coalitions and looking into commitments coming from many different stakeholder groups. We will see more national pathways and strengthen national pathways, and we will continue to spread the word about that. So by the summit moment, we really want to see a strong statement of action by the Secretary General encompassing all that we have discussed over this year. We are intending to launch 15 to 20 coalitions, and we will certainly have a whole set of heads of state and government to really bring the message to the political level where it belongs. And after the summit is before the summit, we will really see that more than anything as a start point, particularly for the country work, to go on over the next 9 years. So we really land in 2030 with the transformation of food systems we all want to see. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is, you have seen that before, in short, what we want to get out of this Food System Summit in September. A strong statement of action by the Secretary General that really sets the narrative, the tone for these 9 years, 9 harvests to achieve the SDGs. We want to see a large number of member states making commitments, showing their work on strategies, policies, investments to turn the food systems around. We want also to encourage sets of multi-stakeholder commitments coming from non-state actors. We continue, and this is something we are quite proud about, to build vibrant communities of practice, local, regional, national, sectoral communities who are coming together and sharing their experience and their best practices. And we want to see a set of regular follow-up and review on national, regional, and global levels. Can I have the next slide, please? So this, I will be very short here. David is going to speak more about that. This is an overview of where countries have nominated national conveners. It's fantastic to see not only the number of dialogues coming up, but also the intensity and the depth of them. And just to highlight one number on the right-hand side, it's now way above 700 independent dialogues and counting. We basically have several dialogues every single day where different constituencies are coming together to discuss in an open and inclusive spirit the transformation of food systems. Next slide, please. So this is important. You can now register for the pre-summit, and there is no number limit for registering. It will be interactive. You can participate in the conversations. You can ask your questions. So please do register. The registration system is online. I'm sure we can show the slide later. You find it on our main website, unfoodsystems.org, under registration. So please do register for the summit now, for the pre-summit. Next slide, please. So the pre-summit is shaping up with a very strong COVID protocol, enabling, when desired, in-person participation from all over the planet, while indeed we are, of course, mindful how difficult it is given the circumstances currently, and are investing lots of time and energy in building a virtual participation system in which no participant who will be participating virtually will feel second best. We go to great lengths to make virtual participation seamless and on eye level so that everybody can have part in this inclusive discussion worldwide. Next slide, please. So this is where we stand with the pre-summit program that, oops, sorry, go back one, yeah. Monday, July 26th, we are going to open in the morning. There will be early afternoon a ceremonial opening also to cater for all the different time zones, because obviously between early afternoon and late afternoon is the best available slot to cover as many time zones as possible. We have clustered the pre-summit program around areas where we have seen from many different conversations, convergence around specific topics. So on the first day, we will be speaking about latest science and knowledge. We will speak about the imperative to end hunger and nourish all people. And again, the numbers that will be coming up in some minutes are most concerning, and it's a most pertinent topic to start our pre-summit with. We will be speaking about planetary boundaries and how we can produce our food in a way that is positive for climate, environment, and biodiversity. The light blue box that you see in the center, you see over the 3 days, are affiliated sessions. These are more than 100 sessions organized in the responsibility of different organizations, NGOs, academia, and so on, but affiliated with our Food System Summit. These are 15 minutes, highly informative sessions, and the whole list of those will be going online very shortly. Then you see in the afternoon, we are taking deep dives with our different constituency groups, and we are having space, of course, for the many ministerial statements in which you will get an update on what's happening from the side of the national governments. Now let us go to Tuesday. Next slide. So second day, we will be looking into our different levers of change, of which you are certainly familiar: gender, finance, innovation, and human rights. We have dedicated sessions for that. And then in the later morning sessions, we will be speaking about the need to shift to healthy and sustainable consumption patterns, to advance inclusive livelihoods, to build resilience, while we go on with the ministerial statements and more affiliated sessions. Then in the afternoon, we will be looking again into the different constituencies and the priorities that are coming out from there. Let me speed up a bit. I have some more slides. Next slide, please. Just checking the time. So what's important here is particularly the synthesis plenary from 11:30 to 1:30, where we will try to bring all of the different levels of engagement inside our process, but also outside our process together. And there was an invitation that was sent directly to the civil society mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security to bring their findings from the alternative event that the CSM has decided to organize. And we are curious to integrate all of the voices, whether they were in the process or outside the process. And then we will have a ceremonial ending, bringing all of the energy of these 3 days and really of a 1.5-year engagement process to set the path forwards towards the Food System Summit itself and in September in New York. Next slide, please. So here are some highlights from the program that are specifically relevant for civil society. There's a dedicated session organized by the Committee on World Food Security Monday evening at 6:30. There's a dedicated session on human rights that will also inform an annex to the Secretary General Statement of Action on Human Rights. I will show that in a second. There is a big session around inclusive livelihoods, poverty-free value chains, empowered communities. There are sessions on civil society priorities. And again, please do register so you can be part of the discussion. And I think it's also very interesting for civil society to be part on the discussion on follow-up and review, where we will have, of course, also the chair of the Committee on Food Security and sessions on city and local food systems and indigenous peoples. And I already mentioned that the CSM is invited to report back at our main synthesis event at the end of 3 days pre-summit. Next slide, please. Next one. So I already mentioned the Secretary General's Statement of Action, which is hopefully a short document. We have received so much feedback on it, but we have tried to keep it high level and short. But this Statement of Action will be complemented by a whole set of additional documents, which are also very important. We want to give an overview over this summit and the engagement process in it, because it is quite a different summit from other UN summits. So there are many experiences to share. We want to have the synthesis reports over the National Food System Summit dialogues and the Independent Food System Summit dialogues. All of the work in the action tracks will be condensed in sharp 2 pages around specific areas of expertise that will form together a repository of knowledge. which will be mirrored by communities of practice on the food systems community website. So it's not only a 2-page document, but a vibrant community of practitioners that can help in particular countries to learn more about certain methodologies, techniques, lessons learned, and so on. Then we will have a set of coalitions. I briefly spoke about that at the outset, but we are also looking at other commitments and actions from member states and also from a whole set of non-state actors that can come in. Faith groups, for example, young people. We're working on a youth pledge, local governments, and so on and so forth. What you see in the olive box on the right-hand side. Then there will be additional papers, policy briefs on our 4 levers of change, on human rights, gender. Can you please mute your microphone? Okay. Human rights, gender, science and innovation, and economics of food systems, and also papers on governance, which are slowly shaping up, and questions of social and environmental equity. And of course, a document about the follow-up and review, which we are going to very much shape during the pre-summit. Next slide, please. Next one. I'm not going to do that. No, I think this is the slide from the beginning. So that was my presentation then. Thank you. We are starting from the beginning. That was my presentation. I actually saved you, Yukiko, 3 minutes. So we have more time for question and answers. And with that, back to you.
Thank you so much, Martin. As usual, so much information. So I hope people are putting all the questions, and then we'll have more time to discuss later on. So now let's move on to the progress updates and next steps around Food System Summit Dialogue. So David Navarro from 4SD is joining us. So thank you, David, for joining. The floor is yours.
Hey, Yukiko and everybody. It's so nice to be here. Look at this. What a giant meeting, 300 people plus connected. I'm delighted to share with you progress with one part of the summit preparation, that is the multi-stakeholder dialogue program. I'm actually coming a bit before other people because I have to go off to another event a little bit prematurely. So I hope that as you hear me, you will recognize that I am but part of the preparatory process. There are, of course, the scientific group, the action tracks, the levers of change, champions network, so much more. But let me tell you a bit about the dialogues. These are multi-stakeholder dialogues designed to help ensure that on issues to do with the future of food, there is the fullest possible engagement of different stakeholder groups in the pattern of inclusiveness, the People's Summit and the Solutions Summit that we've been asked to set up by the UN Secretary General. So the figures that you had from Martin, but I think they bear repeating, is that having been invited by the Secretary General to participate in the dialogues, 140 out of the 193 United Nations member states have now formally engaged in the Food System Summit Dialogues process. That's 100 more than we expected at the beginning. It is an enormous number. And they are hard at work. 429 individual dialogues have been announced on the Dialogues Gateway. And the work's moving ahead really quickly. 239 feedback forms from dialogues have been received. We had 164 feedback forms in the middle of June, and we've been doing a really detailed synthesis of what we learned from them. But you can see with 239 now, a month later, the number of dialogues is just continuing to grow. And I think my first point to you all is just to say unprecedented interest and continuing engagement within the member states in the dialogue process, and it will go on right up to the summit and beyond. Secondly, we've got a program of independent dialogues. Did you know that 730 independent food system summit dialogues have been announced on the gateway? We've received 318 feedback forms. An incredibly rich synthesis has just been released, and that contains the outcomes of all the feedback reforms received as of May the 21st. And then we've got a program of global dialogues underway, and we've had 9 global dialogues, but more importantly, we have an increasing number of global dialogues being announced all the time. And we just did a special global dialogue with producer organizations from around the world, absolutely massive. The key messages coming through the dialogues everywhere are as follows. First, COVID is changing everything, and it's not finished. Anybody who talks about post-COVID has somehow not seeing what you're all seeing. COVID is here, now, everywhere. And people might say that it apparently is calming down in Europe, and you get stories of people relaxing and going back to what they call normal. I'm telling you that what we're picking up from all of you is it's not normal, and it won't be normal for many more years. Society is having to learn to cope with everything that COVID is revealing and more, and it goes on. That's the first finding. It's very serious indeed. Second finding, countries want to transform their food systems. From the top of government, they want to do it. They want to look at food with a completely wide-angle approach. They want to bring nutrition, nature, livelihoods, the role of women, the role of young people, and most importantly, rural poverty and distress. They all want to bring that in. They say food has got to change. Moving from food security to food systems, and then getting the food systems of the future that their countries need, they all want it. And they'll come to Rome saying, we need to transform our food systems, and we need to do it now in the interests of all our people and in the interests of the planet. It's so strong, everybody, and it's coming from governments. And they are saying, we want to do it with all stakeholders sitting around the table, farmers and fishers, livestock keepers, forest dwellers, and others involved in production must be there. And the interests of those who are poorest and most disadvantaged must be heard, and hunger must be addressed. This is coming from all countries, some stronger than others. And the most important message is we need to transform our food systems completely, not just 1 or 2 bits, but the whole thing. And it's a big project and it's urgent. Message number 3, countries want to work together. They don't want to be separate. If they're coping with the impact of COVID on imports, they want to deal with that together. If they're trying to deal with a food system where water is just less and less available because of climate change, let's do it together. If they're trying to deal with the challenges of trying to getting adequate remuneration to smallholder farmers, let's do it together. Working separately is not seen to be an option. So they'll come to the pre-summit and come to the summit seeking to build joint action, but joint action that is in the interests of the country and its people, that responds to their priorities, not to priorities set from elsewhere. That's what we're hearing from the countries. Pay attention to our needs, to our people, our priorities. And so that's why, as we move to the pre-summit, that's why as we get organized, we've got a wonderful thing happening where the action tracks with all their member state members and their specialist members are coming together with the conveners of the national dialogues and are linking up with the independent dialogue process and the global dialogue process. So with food, we are really dealing with this from the communities and the countries, as well as from the specialists and the scientific experts, to meet in the middle and have an overall pathway towards the sustainable food futures that the world needs. Thanks to all of you. You're there. Civil society is throughout the national dialogues, the independent dialogues, and the global dialogues, calling everybody to account and asking us, do we stick by those human rights principles that have been there for so many years? Do we stick by the Sustainable Development Agenda? Do we support a world where there is equity in the face of this terrible pandemic? Or are we going to just cope with the terrible inequities of vaccine access that we're seeing at the moment? We have a chance now, through the Food Summit, to deal with much bigger inequities on climate, on COVID, on biodiversity that we're seeing building up all over, that are actually the story of the future that we have to fight for. So thank you for being part of this process, and thank you for the chance to feed back to you.
Thank you so much, David. So strong message, time to sort of absorb all the amazing updates. So now we have about 10 minutes of discussion times. I wonder if there are any comments, questions from other panelists. I see that comments coming in for excellent synthesis. Any feedback? But if there's no question, I wonder if there is no question, we can move on. And then probably, I think there has been so much information. So if people come back with questions afterwards in the chat box, well, Q&A box is always open, so we can deal with it later on. So now we can move on to the next segment, which is about progress updates from the levers of change and then action tracks. So I now start with Jemima Njuki from CGIAR on the gender segment. I'm so sorry for pronouncing your surname wrongly.
It's all right, Yukiko. Thank you. Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Yukiko said, my name is Jemima Njuki, and I've been leading the lever of change on gender equality and women's empowerment. And our role really as a team has to be to make sure that gender equality and the empowerment of women remains central to the food systems processes and content, discussions and solutions, with the goal of making sure that as food systems transform all the way from local to national to global level, that they transform in ways that are just and equitable, that they can provide nutritious foods for all, irrespective of gender, of race, of other identities. So the last few months, we have had dialogues across regions to hear the voices of men, of women, and other groups in terms of what their visions for food systems are. We've also been looking at other dialogues that are happening, whether they're indigenous peoples, whether they are the dialogues with farmers, with producers, with pastoralists, with fisher folk, because all those are part of what we want to see in this just and equitable food system process. So at the moment, what we have now is a couple of recommendations, some recommendations for how to address gender inequalities in food systems. We are aware that COVID-19 has to a great extent exacerbated some of the inequalities that we've been seeing in food systems in terms of loss of jobs, loss of livelihoods, health implications, food insecurity, and nutrition. And so we are now at the point of forming a coalition around gender and food systems, those who really are committed, interested in seeing justice within, and especially gender justice from our group, at least in terms of food systems. I'll mention a couple of the things that we are coalescing around. It's strengthening women's voice and leadership in food systems, and especially working with organizations, processes, partnerships, all the way from local to systemic level that are engaged in food systems, making sure that women's voices and leadership are heard. The second one that we are coalescing around is, and this is very important, hubs or innovations to support women who are producing indigenous and nutritious foods, because we know women have been such a critical part of household and community nutrition. What kind of support can we give women to continue this really important role? We are working also with a couple of governments to see how food system policies can be more feminist, how to incorporate ideas like gender responsive budgeting in food systems policies. How do we reform extension systems so that they actually work for women and prioritize the needs and constraints of women? We are looking to form an alliance of organizations that will provide transformative financial inclusion that works for women. So these are just some of the things in our list of the menu and items for which we are seeking a coalition to take them forward, including after the summit. And we will be discussing a few of these during the pre-summit. So I encourage all of you, please reach out. I can send some of these documents and write-ups of these ideas so that you can see which ones of them you are interested in forming some coalitions around. I'll stop there, Yukiko, and I'll be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A that might come up.
Excellent, Jemima. Thank you so much for your leadership. Now let's move on to human rights. Christine Campo from CARE. Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kiko. By design, the UN Food Systems Summit convenes actors from a multiple sectors to transform food systems. Human rights introduces the core component, a common language, a unified framework for our coming together. The role of stakeholders is undisputable, so we need to take a closer look at how actors are responding to their obligations and whether there are sufficient accountability mechanisms in place, as mentioned by Agnes. However, for right holders to be able to claim their rights, first they need to be conscious that they have rights and have the capacity to exercise them. So one example under Action Track 4 is that we've been encouraging training so that people have the knowledge and tools necessary to demand their rights and demand that they be respected, protected, and fulfilled, and to hold duty bearers to account. A lot of organizations are already doing great work around this, so I'd like to highlight FIAN and FAO, and the focus there is mostly on around the right to food, but there's an array of human rights that need to be understood and enforced. Then Action Track 3, we'll hear from Zhao about their work around Indigenous peoples' rights and the protection of natural resources. From our colleagues in Action Track 5, we'll definitely hear about their work on universal access on food. So what have we done so far? After wave 1, after we heard 2,000 solutions that have come into us, we grouped the human rights experts from across the action tracks and summit process and looked at what is already happening across the action tracks and how can we make sure we continue to mainstream a human rights approach throughout. I'm pleased to see several of the people involved in these efforts as part of our 300 plus just joining on Zoom. So I'm sure there's several others joining through Facebook today. So in addition to Michael Thackeray, who's playing an integral part of our integration team, we have a lot of other special rapporteurs who have joined our efforts, including Halal Alvar. Melissa Shapiro, who you may know, has also joined our team full-time as our human rights expert. And if you know Melissa well, she's the right-hand man to Michael Thackeray for a lot of what he does, and also Halal Alvar. So others are obviously most welcome to join. Lastly, we're all now busy preparing for the human rights session for the pre-summit, which Martin has alluded to already. And the aim of that session is really to showcase what has already been done, what is being done, but also to serve as a bridge to the OHCHR and the Human Rights Council in hoping that greater collaboration happens between the pre-summit and the summit itself. For example, we have Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, as our opening speaker, and we welcome all of you to join to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Brilliant, very succinct. So let's move on to the innovation part by Alexandra Lupukin from Mercy Corps. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And nice to be back talking with everyone today. I will I'll do a quick overview of the innovation lever in case there are new joiners to the call. The innovation lever is convening a reference group that brings together public, private, and the social sector, making sure with our goal is to ensure innovation is sort of a key enabler to see truly systemic change in the food system. The lever is being co-led by the World Economic Forum and with Mercy Corps. We ended up coming together around two different actions, supporting tracks. One looking at specifically working with the action tracks and the game changers to find where innovation was kind of being surfaced as one of the ways to get to solutions, but also working across sort of systemic innovation agendas. And we've sort of landed on 4 different areas: data and digital, knowledge and technology, national and regional areas, and society and institution innovation. So the groups have been subdivided. We've been meeting kind of weekly, bi-weekly. We get together as a reference group to do exchange and learnings. So I want to offer you a quick dive into the different areas and then what we've been discovering as sort of the overall innovation lever and what we're trying to offer to the summit process. So in the data and digital working group, it's a review of basically what are some of the digital innovations that exist currently and could exist to help farm to fork chain, looking at food management, food waste management, support across the whole chain, and ultimately developing a playbook around circular food marketplace references and a model in which we can start to think differently again around literally farm to fork and managing food. The knowledge and technology working group is really envisioning how to help transition 100 million farmers towards a net zero, nature positive practices. And to do that using technology, using different types of knowledge that exists. And so it's sort of like trying to bring together all of these pieces that exist in the world with this vision of 100 million farmers to transition to net zero. The Society Institutional Working Group is arguing that there are a lot of principles that exist. Everybody feels very strongly that we need to have good multi-stakeholder dialogue, but often the innovation on how to do that is missing. And so the Society Institutional Working Group is pulling together kind of a practical guide, what we're almost calling a cheat sheet on questions you could ask yourself to ensure that is the dialogue I'm sitting in or I'm hosting truly multi-stakeholder and collaborative. How do I know that? Questions to ask yourself, which we believe could support the rollout of whatever's going to come from the summit as we begin to implement the big ideas. How do we ensure the innovation is that new and interesting people are at the table and not just the same as we've been seeing? National and regional working group, quickly looking at how do we build national and regional ecosystems to drive innovation, such as like innovation food hubs, or really trying to really like practical places and spaces within countries to drive innovation. So last point I'll just say is that really what we've been very clear and what's come to the surface, and I think we've heard it from some of the other different panelists this morning and those that are working across the summit, is that innovation isn't just about the technology and the scientific tools that we have now at our disposal, but really it's about innovation of inclusion. How do we build a new food system that brings the different voices that have not been at the table before? How do we include voices? How do Indigenous communities, women farmers, and put at the center ideas and solutions that haven't been there before? And how do we make sure that that is truly the innovation that we're bringing throughout the summit? So our goal is to make sure that that concept of innovation of inclusion is at the pre-summit, that is at the summit, and truly as we roll out from the summit into implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. A lot of information here. Now let's move on to the final finance lever from Geeta Sethi from World Bank. Geeta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yukiko. It is a real pleasure on behalf of the finance lever to talk here today. I wanted to share where we started this journey in thinking through a finance system for sustainable food systems. Hidden costs of the current food system, which really was a departure point for us thinking through this, is subtracts rather than adds value to the way food system is being financed. And therefore, a system that's subtracting value can still rely on this kind of a financial support meant that the solution to really rethinking sustainable food systems means rethinking a financing system that is supporting it. So the three broad buckets that one kind of wanted to work around is, of course, one, the public support, 700 billion a year, going toward the food system that's subtracting value. Private finance, which is north of $2 trillion, and consumer spending, which is about 12 to 15% of global GDP, which is 87 trillion. So these are big buckets. And I think a very important aspect of our financing of the food system was also how the financing can support farmers, where they are recognized not just as producers of food, but also guardians of eco-services. The second, and let me give you a flavor in terms of what we mean when we say financial system undermines rather than underpins sustainable transformation. Today, less than 10% of global climate finance is invested in food and land use. Second, there is a big gap between how poverty lines are being defined and what we call as affordable, healthy diets. There is a gap there. There is a big gap in terms of the ESG system, which is largely voluntary. Now, with all of these issues in terms of needing to be addressed for a sustainable food system, what you see in front of you is a slide that we've kind of put together a set of financial imperatives which are important for this transformation to happen. Let me highlight a few, but we would love to hear comments from you. If not today, then please feel free to reach out. First is for the private companies, for corporate finance, really moving from an ESG system from voluntary to mandatory. Second, it also means that ensuring living wages and living incomes are systems are held accountable for. Third, it also means having a deforestation-free pension funds. Pension funds are $30 trillion, give or take. So if we can really make this into clean industry, I think we think it's gonna have a huge impact in terms of financing of food systems and the signaling in the system. Second is rethinking poverty lines. We've heard a lot about hunger, about the fact that people are not able to afford healthy diets. It means that the poverty lines, which are largely underpinned by food security, need to be underpinned by food and nutrition security. It also means, therefore, then the social protection programs or income enhancement programs are more nutrition focused and sensitive. And finally, the big bucket is of repurposing of public support. This is important not to take away the support, but to have a public support that actually ensures a system of sustainable food system which obeys the planetary boundaries. And we do not have 3 billion people today that have some element of malnutrition. So how do we ensure that we have a public support system that actually moves the food systems in the directions of healthy people, healthy planet, healthy economy? And these slides lay out a little bit more in detail in terms of what are some of the imperatives that we've been thinking about. And with that, back to you, Yukiko.
Thank you so much, Geeta. I would like to study more details later, just for myself as well. So let's move on to the updates from action tracks. I'll start with Lana Weinschnan, Youth Vice Chair, Action Track 2 and Youth Advocate. Lana, you're here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'll just be doing an update on youth engagement, and then we'll go into some more of the action tracks. So the big update in terms of engaging young people has been the ongoing youth consultation that we've been hosting on the platform Spark Blue, which is online and any young person can engage with. So I'm also going to put that into the chat. If any young people here are interested in putting their views into hearing from young people for the summit, and that is going until the 20th of July. So it also encouraged people to share that with their networks. Also coming up, we will have basically a youth moment or a youth event before the pre-summit, where we'll be looking at some of what we've heard in the consultation and preparing youth engagement for the upcoming pre-summit that we're looking to. We're also looking forward to having participation of young people directly in the pre-summit itself on the ground, as well as through a dedicated youth session to hear what young people can commit to, what we want to see, and also what we want stakeholders such as government and business to do. And we also have been accepted for some youth parallel sessions to the pre-summit. So we're looking forward to those as well. We also have International Youth Day coming up on the 12th of August, and the theme for the United Nations International Youth Day this year is on transforming food systems for individual and for planetary health. So UN activities on this day are expected to be really relevant to themes of the UN Food Systems Summit. And also some of the young people who are doing work around the Food Systems Summit will be involved in bringing that forward. So definitely keep an eye out. And we're also looking forward to the entire month of August, really highlighting the role of young people in food systems and have different events happening around then coming up. As the summit is moving forward, we also have young people involved in the action areas and the solution clusters, especially the youth vice chairs. And we have the Act for Food, Act for Change, also youth-led pledge and Actions for Change that has been expanding, now reaching over 1,400 pledges from young people around the world. And really want to encourage everyone here to reach the pledge and fill that out at actionsforfood.org. And then if you're also a young person watching under the age of 30, please vote for your food systems actions that matter most to you and your community at actionsforchange.org. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lana, and very exciting, this youth mobilization and engagement. So thank you so much. So now let's move on to Christine Campo on the Action Track 4 chair. Christine?
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Me again. So Action 4 is about advancing equitable livelihoods. And of course, that's why I talk a lot about human rights, because we want to make sure that those who are working across our food systems understand and appreciate their human rights. David rightly mentioned COVID. Since the start of the year, it was estimated that over half of the 3.3 global workforce were at risk of losing their livelihoods. Borders were closed, trade was restricted. Confinement measures meant that farmers couldn't access markets. They had no way to buy inputs or sell their produce. Many people lost their source of income and many returned home to their villages. The pandemic exposed existing inequalities and only worsened the condition for the most marginalized people. It's the world's small-scale food producers, fisher folk, indigenous people, seasonal and migrant workers, those who produce the food that we eat. These are the people that are the most underpaid, poorly protected, and exploited people around. They have no social protection, no access to quality healthcare, no stable incomes to provide for themselves and their families. So we ask ourselves, how can this be improved? How can we ensure that the concerns of the most underrepresented are heard? How can we make sure that it's those whose livelihoods are being impacted are the ones that are leading the solutions being proposed? So within Action Track 4, the solutions that we've received from you have been slotted under 3 action areas. That first action area is under rebalancing agency within food systems. It's about the way that the underrepresented can be empowered and assembled to increase their bargaining power and demand justice and equity and equality. You would have heard from Jemima and the gender lead, our work on gender transformative actions. That's some of the coalitions, an example of a coalition that we are hoping will help move that agenda forward. The next area of action is eliminating worker exploitation, ensuring decent work. That's about ensuring the enabling conditions and living incomes that people can thrive with dignity. So under this area, there's a coalition on living incomes and wages that we're hoping to garner a lot of attention from member states and businesses. ILO, which is a strong member, is working on a potential coalition around youth employment. And our UN anchor is Action Track 4, which is EFAD, is working a lot on how to finance this through public development banks. Our last action area where this is coming together is under localizing food systems. What do shorter supply chains look like? What is public procurement schemes, territorial approaches to make sure that that food producers have the closest access to the end user and therefore the greatest profit for their work. As chairs, our expectations at the pre-summit is to showcase some of these great ideas that we've received from across the world and the energy that's coming behind them. So we hope that you'll tune in, get inspired, and help shape the ideas as they continue to evolve further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Excellent. Lots of updates. So now let's move on to Action Track 3, the chair from João Campari, and also I understood Isabella Cosielli as well, from the lead of Action Track 3. So João, I'll pass the microphone to you.
Thank you, Yukiko. Delighted to see you and great to be here with all of you today. You know, for those of you who are joining this conversation for the first time, the goal of Action Track 3 is to boost nature-positive food production to meet the fundamental human right to healthy and nutritious food while operating within planetary boundaries, okay? So each time we talk about the need to transform food production systems, we must also consider the urgency required for this transformation to happen. As I always like to remember ourselves, we are 9 harvests away from delivering the SDGs, and we urgently need more concrete ideas to help resolve this, ideas that we can actually walk around. To date, we have received almost 400 of such ideas to populate real action areas that endeavor to do 3 things in Action Track 3. The first one, the first set of ideas aimed at protecting nature from further conversion for food production. The second types of things that we need to do in Action Track 3 is to sustainably manage our existing production systems on land and in water. And thirdly, restore degraded ecosystems and rehabilitate soil functions. So these 3 types of strategies form our action areas. The ideas that we have received have been grouped around 12 thematic clusters. Each cluster has a multi-stakeholder working group whose job is to co-create ambitious roadmaps to help deliver the SDGs. Today, there are more than 100 organizations supporting the work of Action Track 3 with a very large contingent of civil society organizations. Let me now highlight 4 clusters that are moving forward in great strides in Action Track 3. First, the cluster on agroecology and regenerative agriculture explores how we can scale out these practices to help address the climate and biodiversity crisis while improving human health and resilience, and also how these practices lead to more equitable and more sustainable food systems. The second cluster that I'd like to bring to your attention today is on aquatic and blue foods. This cluster is considering how we can fully realize the potential for sustainable aquatic foods, but also how they can contribute to ending malnutrition and build healthy, resilient food systems and provide safe, dignified jobs. The cluster on repurposing public support to food and agriculture is another cluster that I'd like to highlight to you. And the work of this cluster looks at how subsidies and financial incentives can be adapted to ensure that producers who are implementing nature-positive production practices are rewarded and incentivized. And one cluster that I'd like to bring to your attention in particular is the one that Christine mentioned in her introductory remarks. We have a cluster that is entirely dedicated to Indigenous people's food production systems. And this cluster works alongside other action tracks, especially on clusters on Indigenous rights that are being managed by Action Track 4. The coming months are very critical in driving momentum to deliver on these solutions. This starts with the pre-summit, which will provide a crucial opportunity to address the triple challenge of meeting our food, biodiversity, and climate goals. 2021, I consider it a super year, if you will, for food. And we have a crucial opportunity this year to unleash the power of food systems to address the multiple crises we face. And to do that, we need to connect more and more the UN Food Systems Summit to COP26 and CBD this year, and to the UN CCD and the UN Oceans Conference next year. I'm really looking forward, Yukiko and everyone, to continuing to work with all the people on this call so that we can discuss solutions for nature-positive world that benefits people and the planet. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Exciting and really encouraged to work together. So now I move to Action Track 2, Gunhild Stordalen. Sorry for my pronunciation, I feel terrible.
Thank you so much. It's difficult for any non-Norwegian to pronounce, indeed. But thank you so much, and it's great to see all of you again. Thanks for continuing to take the time and be here to help shape the critical work of the summit. So thanks also to Christine and Zhao and Lana and the other colleagues on this call. And thanks, Zhao, for reminding us about the urgency and how things are connected. So over the past weeks and months, the Action Track 2 team has been working to further shape and develop the propositions we have received from people and stakeholders, including from many of you, and shape that into truly systemic and ambitious solution clusters, together with the other action tracks and levers of change. And around these solution clusters, as you understand, action coalitions now are starting to form, which is really exciting. Just to give you a quick reminder, Action Track 2 is shepherding 5 solution clusters. The first is on healthy food environments. The second is on information investments to motivate and educate consumers to shift demands. The third is on school meals and school educations. The fourth is on One Health, the One Health framework, which includes antimicrobial resistance and animal health and welfare. And the fifth is on food loss and food waste along the value chain, called Food is Never Waste. We are currently seeing that 3 different action coalitions will potentially emerge from these clusters. And again, everything is in collaboration with the other tracks and levers, and of course in close dialogues with the countries and David. And I'm going to just give you a quick update on where we are on those three, starting with the most advanced coalition, which is around the school meals. It's called Nutrition, Health and Education for Every Child, and it's led by Finland and France, but also with strong leadership from Guatemala, Honduras, and World Food Programme holding the secretariat. And there are now around 55 member states involved in the coalition. So that is basically already rolling. The objective is to ensure that by 2030, every child in the entire world has access to a nutritious, healthy school meal that is sourced from local farmers in a sustainable or regenerative, actually, nature positive way. And the meal program will also be linked to school education, as I said. So kids are learning about where our food comes from and what impact it has on our bodies and our planets and social equity. The overarching idea of this coalition is not the meal in itself, but to leverage school meals as one way to transform food systems. Next, in collaboration with Action Track 1 and Action Track 3, we have one coalition in the making on shifting diets with the working title Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems. And this coalition will form around 2 of the solution clusters under Action Track 2 and 1 of the clusters in Action Track 1. And it aims to increase the diversity, the availability, and the affordability of healthy, nutritious, and safe diets, while reducing the amounts of ultra-processed snacks and ready-to-eat foods and drinks high in fats, sugar, and or salt. And of course, ensure that these foods are produced using nature-positive, regenerative production practices that also sustain livelihoods. Last but definitely not least is Food is Never Waste, which again address food waste and food loss across the value chain. Action Track 3 is heavily involved in this one. And it's an emerging coalition now on member states, businesses in the food sector and other organizations that are coming together with the aim of implementing specific initiatives to halve waste and loss by 2030. By adopting the Target, Measure, Act approach to address hotspots and issues that are identified in specific regions, countries, cities, or even in organizations or companies. And it's all about multi-stakeholder, public-private partnerships. Finally, Action Track 2 has one session on day 2 of the pre-summit. We are calling it Unleashing the Power of the Plate for the Health of People and Planet. And this session will showcase all the great work that has been done and all the critical actions and examples of success that have been submitted, and allow, most importantly, for an inclusive debate to further help shape and co-create an exciting, compelling menu of solution propositions for shifting diets and halving food loss and food waste, and shifting to more circular food economies to ensure a healthy, just and sustainable food future for all. So we invite you all to join us virtually and be part of this important discussion and debate together with other key actors. Over.
Thank you so much, Gunhild. Very energizing with all the actions coming in. So now I pass the microphone to Anouk Devry and from Action Track 1. Anouk?
Yes, thank you very much, Yukiko. I'm joining on behalf of Lauren Sadat, who's the chair of Action Track 1, but was unfortunately not able to make it today. As the other action tracks have also explained, we are also working on setting up several coalitions. And we really use the guidance of member states and other organizations there to make sure that interest and priorities that come out of dialogues and other conversations are all aligned with the Action Track mandate in setting up coalitions. So for the pre-summit, we really focus on launching a coalition of action for zero hunger. And as was already mentioned earlier, this coalition is really needed because hunger levels are high and they're increasing. The SOFI numbers, which are actually being released today, they will show a very significant increase in hunger globally, and especially in Africa, in South Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean, which are some of the regions in the world which already struggle with some high hunger numbers. And drivers such as conflict and climate change, but also underinvestment in agriculture, they're not expected to go away. And as David has already pointed out, COVID is here and COVID is not yet about to go. And it has only worsened the hunger situation. We see that women are disproportionately affected as well as children, and therefore action is needed. In 2019, the Cirrus 2030 report was launched, and this report identified 10 high impact areas of investment, both on and off the farm, which are really important to reduce hunger significantly. And it will also at the same time generate co-benefits for climate and for food producers. So with the support from member states from all across the world, from private sector who are ready to sign the Zero Hunger Pledge, as well as organizations like the Emergency Nutrition Network, Action Against Hunger, CIF, One Acre Fund, several UN institutions, and many others were ready to launch this coalition. The coalition itself does not aim to generate new mechanisms, but it really hopes to create new momentum to put the topic of hunger, as the SOFI numbers will demonstrate, which is so needed, to put it back on top of the agenda. And we very much look forward also to hearing more from all of you during the main session that we have on day one at the summit. Then our second coalition, which was already addressed by Gunhild just now, on healthy diets from sustainable food systems, is also really relevant because, as Geeta mentioned earlier, more than 3 billion people are not able to afford a healthy diet. So we very much look forward to working with Action Track 2 and 3 to work on this coalition and be ready to launch it during the summit. Lastly, and also very closely aligned with the Action Track 1 mandate, is a coalition for action towards safer food, so food safety. We know that if food is not safe, it's actually not nutritious food because you might get ill. There's high burdens of disease involved with unsafe food. And therefore action is very much needed to address, to achieve SDG 2 and to make sure that food safety is addressed across the supply chain. So this coalition, which is just starting to be set up right now, will aim to set up a multi-stakeholder platform of knowledge, of innovation, of capacity building, and also of mainstreaming food safety. And it will focus on topics such as risk assessment and tools and solutions that are especially suitable in low and middle income countries. Also taking into account the importance there of SMEs and the informal market, because so many people in low and middle income countries are dependent on SMEs and the informal sector to get their daily food. This is a topic that emerged from many of the national dialogues as well as from Action Track 1 as a priority. So we're really happy to hope that we can support member states as well as others to ensure more food safety. And then lastly, we're also supporting several other coalitions which are relevant across the food system and across action tracks, but are now currently under Action Track 1 or supported by Action Track 1. This is acting on the true value of food, which we're developing in collaboration with the Science Group. And it aims to make healthy and sustainable food profitable and affordable to all by including positive and negative externalities. So really looking at what the true value and price of food should actually be and accounting for negative and positive externalities. Then there's the national pathways for food systems transformation. Actors from the innovation lever, the governance area, and also from Action Track 1 are coming together to discuss how we can actually follow up on all of the important outcomes coming out of the national dialogues, really recognizing that this is such a valuable process and that we should really build upon the experiences of the national dialogue. And lastly, also a coalition on food systems data, because if you don't have data, how are you going to make decisions? So having an increasing access to high quality data, making sure that people are able to use that no matter where they are or what sort of position in the food system they have will be really important to ensure well-informed decision-making for food system transformation. On all of these, we're still doing a lot of outreach to member states, to other stakeholders, to private sector, and really hope that we can be guided by your priorities and your interest that have come up throughout the summit process, and that we'll continue to listen to as we prepare for the pre-summit and the summit. So thank you very much for your attendance and for all your time that you're putting into this, and back to you, Yukiko.
Thank you so much, Anouk. Then now we move on to the co-chair of Action Track 5, Salim Haku. Salim, are you there?
Yes. Hello, how are you, Yukiko? Everybody, thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of Action Track 5, it's my pleasure to share with you. All right. So we have basically 4 solution clusters that we are going to be taking forward to the pre-summit in July, in the next few days. They're under 3 headings or action areas. The first one being food system resilience, making food systems more resilient going forward. The second one, looking at universal food access to build resilience, taking a very much of a human rights perspective, a right to food. And thirdly, taking a climate resilient development pathways approach, because many of the country dialogues have mentioned the linkage to climate change as one of the issues that they'd like to take forward. So under these 3 broad action areas, we also have a number of clusters. The first cluster is a humanitarian development and peace Nexus cluster. This is focusing mainly on what used to be called fragile states and areas where people have great difficulty in getting food and are under great stress. Those are a number of cluster areas and organizations and member states who are very interested in that particular cluster. The second one, which is highlighted here because that is the one that is most well advanced and is likely to the coalition is likely to be finalized in the pre-summit, looks at resilient food supply chains, particularly local production for local consumption. This is something that the COVID-19 crisis has exposed, the lack of ability to provide sufficient food for farmers who produce the food and people who are consuming the food, and relying on local production and local consumption has become a way forward rather than in relying on global chains of food supply. So local consumption for local production for local consumption is going to be one of the major coalitions coming out of the pre-summit for us. The third one, as I mentioned, is looking at food as a public good, and a human right, and a human commons, and a universal food access and indigenous people's food systems, linking very much to indigenous people's rights. This is something that many human rights activists and people working in this arena have put to us, and we have taken that on board. Very strong indigenous people's support for this one. And we also are pleased to see a number of member states also happy to take this forward. And we would welcome any participants who would like to be part of that. And then the fourth and final one, as I mentioned, is linking the food system resilience to climatic shocks and climate impacts, both linking it to both mitigation, as food systems are responsible for significant amount of emissions of greenhouse gases, as well as to adaptation, because particularly vulnerable agriculture workers are extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and also linking it to biological diversity as well. So this particular pathway links food systems to climate change, both at the global level, so the food summit leading on to the COP26 of the Climate Convention that will take place in November this year. And at the national level, many of the national pathways have already identified climate resilient food systems as one of their initial or high priority areas going forward. So I would invite any of you who are interested in participating in any of these food in these solution clusters on resilience to let us know. There's still time to join the different coalitions and to take them forward at the pre-summit itself, but then also beyond the pre-summit to the summit. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Salim. And thanks everyone to those who presented the updates in such a succinct manner. And now we have half an hour of open feedback and question and answers. And just a small reminder, and those of you who have questions, please put it on the Q&A box rather than in the chat box, because we'll try to sort out all the questions. So now I'll start. Got some really interesting questions. I thought it's more interesting to fish out these challenging questions in the open dialogue session. So I'll start maybe for João and or Christine. So there's one question. What is the UN Food System Summit going to do in a concrete way, taking into account of the demands from CSOs, especially in terms of corporate accountability, agroecology at the center, and human rights? And I wonder if João or Christine, would you like to go ahead?
I can. Yeah, Yukiko, thank you. I can go first, and Isabella is here also. Thanks, Isabella, for joining. Can compliment, and Christine and Martin. We do have, since the start of the work of the Action Track 3, a cluster, a group that is dedicated for agroecology. We call it transformation through agroecology and regenerative agriculture. This cluster is led by Emil Frissen, Esther Penunia, and Sinclair Fergus. We have more than 70 members in this working group with a good contingent of member states, civil society organizations, and others. So this is a cluster that we are hoping to put forward in the pre-summit in 2 weeks. So it's moving in great strides, and the work is really amazing what they're doing. So I would like to invite anyone that is interested to work on agroecology and regenerative agriculture to join them. This is an open space. I can put, if you would like, their addresses, their email addresses in the chat box, so anyone can reach out directly. They're doing an amazing work. Let me ask if Christine would like to comment on it, or Mark.
I hope you can hear me. Happy to hop in here. On concrete ways to mainstream human rights across the Food System Summit, I put mine and Melissa's email in the chat box. Please do join us. There is a group working on that, but we can always get it better. I find one of our challenges as Action Tracks, it's essential to mainstream human rights across the ideas that we receive. But as you heard, we've received so many solutions from so many people, and even some people that are genuinely thinking they're coming from a human rights angle. They may not have drafted their solution with the same lens. So we use equity as a criteria as we've moved through the waves to really see what ideas and what solutions should be able to move forward. And we've also been looking for ways to strengthen human rights aspect through each solution. I know every action track has been doing that, and I know Melissa Shapiro is helping us do that as well. But we need to be more bold, and we need to be more targeted between the pre-summit and the summit. So please do join. The door is very much open. On governance, I know there is a group always looking for ways to link the governance mechanisms between the Nutrition for Growth Summit, different summits that we've had, different processes that we've had, what we've learned through the Committee on World Food Security, what makes for a good summit when you're trying to bring every actor together. I'm not organizing that group myself, so I will pop the emails of those people into the chat in case you'd like to get more closely involved in that work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. And Joao as well. So next question is to Martin. And the question is, what are the 5 tone-setting coalitions to be announced at the pre-summit? It seems like the Gender Justice Coalition may be one of them. Is that correct? And what are the others? And how are they being selected?
Okay,
Martin, over to you.
we already heard from the action tracks on the different coalitions, and we want all of the coalitions to be led by countries. So it is basically very much how many countries are supporting a coalition, where we already see now, and Gunhild mentioned that the school feeding coalition, which really is a systemic coalition, it's not just about bringing food to children, that this coalition is already getting a lot of support. Now, I'm a bit careful because it's a dynamic space, but I know that out of Action Track 3, blue food is something that finds a lot of interest. Agroecology is coming through really strongly in regenerative agriculture. Christine mentioned poverty-free value chains. Anouk spoke about the Zero Hunger Coalition. Salim has spoken about the access to food, the resilience food systems. It is not a selection process in a sense that we do one and don't do the other. The question is just what starts first. And I think these are the front runners that we have here. And you know, there's also always questions about corporate captures coming up again and again and again. This is one bit of the answer, is we want the coalitions to be country-led. So it is responding to requests from member states. And again, you know, and I said that many times before, we do have business in our engagement process, but not individual businesses. We have business associations. We do have individual NGOs quite a bit, but in business, we have associations to be quite sure that we are firewalled against particular business interests. And this is something we have been doing consistently. But just this bit on the coalitions, and back to you, Yukiko.
Thank you so much. And then here's another big topic about corporate responsibility. So maybe to Martin and Alison, but any other panelists if they want to answer. So the topic, well, the question is, the corporate responsibility is key to the future. Currently, nearly all of our food systems are being controlled by the major shareholders, such as BlackRock, Vanguard, Stateside, and Berkshire Hathaway. This must change. So this is a sort of introductory question. And then there's another question: what is the response to the corporate culture being pointed out of the summit? So these are the, if you have any comments on this.
I start with the second question. That's of course one of these rhetorical questions, and I very much regret that it was asked by Anonymous. It would be nice to know whom you're talking to. But there's an assumption of corporate capture, which is in this question, which is simply not true. We've been working with business associations, with the private sector mechanism of the Committee for World Food Security, which has accepted our invitation. Unfortunately, the civil society mechanism hasn't accepted the invitation to be institutionally with 5 seats in the action tracks. But all around business, we work with our private sector guiding group, which is bringing business associations together, because business is important in that. And we cannot ignore business when we want business to do better. If we are speaking, and maybe Christine wants to add to that, about poverty-free value chains, these are companies who are genuinely committed to pay, finally, living wages around the value chain. But private sector is so much bigger. This morning I spoke in a big event on small and medium-sized enterprises, and empowering those, bringing power to the ground, ensuring the human rights of those who are most vulnerable, of workers, workers' rights, peasants, migrant workers, and so on, is one of the prime flagship things we are doing with this summit. So sometimes you need to talk precisely to the people who are not doing so well to improve them. But in every single governance decision, be it coalition building, being the action tracks, being our own summit governance, we never had individual companies influencing. And if you look at our advisory committee, for example, you will find representatives from the Committee on World Food Security, the chair is there, Producer Association, Indigenous. So the whole design from the outset is as inclusive as possible. Again, integrating business because it is important. It is the world in which we live, but also making very clear how to balance the different powers, because precisely in reality, so often it is not balanced. And we certainly acknowledge that. And I hope this helps. I would invite my colleague Alison also to add to that, but also Christine or whoever wants to come in. Thank you.
I'll just agree. No, transnational corporations have an incredible responsibility as a dominant power of our food system. So for somebody working in an action track that is looking at sustainable livelihoods and the voice of the small scale food producer, I want them at the table. We need to be dialoguing with everybody, especially those who have massive power over our food systems and have shaped them as they are today. Over.
Thank you so much. If there's no other comment, no. Okay, so another huge topic, poverty. So poverty is the major hurdle in access to food. Without increasing income level of people in poverty, it seems difficult to address hunger. In this context, how do you relate poverty and food access? So maybe I'll open the microphone to Christine on Action Track 4 and Salim as well on the access issue. But anyone else would like to chip in, please do.
Yukiko, I very much think that's for Action Track 4 and 5, so please.
Yeah, I might ask Salim to go first.
Sure. So as I said earlier, we see the human rights aspect in the universal access to food for all people as a very important outcome to ensure resilience of both the food systems and of the people that are dependent on food, both producing it and consuming it as well. So from our perspective, the more effective stakeholder groups who join this coalition to ensure that it is delivered properly as intended, and everybody has access and it is truly universal, the better. This is not to be left to single groups or even one or two countries to do, but it's a universal aspect of what we want to do and will require stakeholders from all over the world and from different constituencies to participate in it. So we look forward to participation, particularly from civil society groups. And also let me mention that we have a session on resilience on the 27th, which I would invite everybody to join during the pre-summit as well. Thank you.
Kiko, would you mind reading the question again one more time for me, please?
Yes, wait a sec. Poverty is the major hurdle in access to food. Without increasing income level of poor people, it seems difficult to address hunger. In this context, how do you relate poverty and food access?
Yeah, no, completely. Again, as I said in my opening remarks about Action Track 4, if people aren't paid a decent or compensated decently for their time worked or for their produce grown, they can't provide for themselves and their families with dignity. That is everything Action Track 4 is working towards, is to, and I've seen within the chat box, Fair Trade and others who are working with us on living income, living wages, what that looks like, pushing companies to make sure that we all, and governments and all of us, to make sure that we understand that responsibility, that we're not just disrespectful of all the work that goes into making sure, as a farmer born and raised, this is part of my livelihood every single day. And this is why I've joined the position that I'm working in now. So it's my promise to you.
Thanks. Another very important question. And we see that CFS and the rights-based approach, RBAs are key players, among others, in taking forward the outcomes of the summit. Thank you. But what does it mean? CFS is recognized as the democratic space to discuss food security and coming up with the recommendations. The UN Food System Summit does not have the legitimacy So how can the CFS take the role of taking forward the outcomes of the summit? Isn't there a legitimacy and democratic glitch? And this probably I would like it to pass to Martin.
Well, thank you. It points to a fundamental misunderstanding. And we have said that ever so often, I'm going to say it again. The UN Food System Summit is not building new norms. It is not only a people's, but also an action summit, which means we are working on the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals. And those have been agreed by all the nations in the world. They are the basis of all of our work. What we have been doing with the action track chairs that are here is we have been listening to the entire world to find out how can we transform our food systems to really be drivers of transformation. And we have indeed taken the expertise and the products from the CFS to build a solid foundation for that. When Joao speaks about the cluster on agroecology, this builds on the 13 principles of the HRPE. That is not the job that the summit is doing. I think the Committee on Food Security is the place to build these norms. And when we are saying all of the work of the summit goes back to Rome, then it is in the hope that the 3 Rome-based agencies continue that work and that the CFS is finding itself a position in working with the increased energy and momentum that this summit has been done. Now, this is something the CFS might or might not want to take. We have the chair of CFS in the advisory committee. We've been working in many, many sessions of the CFS. I think there would be a fantastic role for the CFS looking at all the country level dialogues, 140 country level dialogues. This is something that the CFS and particularly the CSM has been saying for a long time, that we need a CFS multi-stakeholder model in countries. Well, the summit started to do that. So what is the CFS going to take with it? We can't come and mandate anyone and tell people what to do. But to me, from my perspective, there's a tremendous opportunity for the CFS here to take the action that was started. Because if I may, CFS has been brilliant in setting things that are so important, like the voluntary guidelines on tenure, just to give one example. But we need to support and push strongly that the implementation on the ground, the take-up of the products of the CFS is being improved. And I think the Food System Summit has contributed a bit to that. And I hope this continues. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Then there's another question, maybe for all the chairs. How can a CSO join one of the coalitions of different action tracks? To the action track chairs, maybe?
Easy answer. The information's online. I'll put the link in the chat. You just add your name to it, and it's that easy. The door is always open. It's always been open. If anybody wanted, they could have it too, because then I would get a break. So I'll add that link in the chat.
And likewise for cluster 3, we'll put the links in. There are sign-up forms as well. Thanks.
Same for
Excellent.
action track 5. Please feel free to get in touch.
Excellent. So the message is clear. The door is always open. Please be in touch with each action track. Then maybe, given the time constraints, this would be the last question, but challenging question. So I would like anyone to chip in. Many solutions provided here are very aspirational. That would require new or revised global trade agreements, and many will come with an enormous cost. How will the UN Food System Summit try and achieve this jump from good ideas to reality, which the current world order or system has not been able to tackle?
Who should be answering? Well, I can try a first go on that. I did my presentation a bit earlier and showed the slide, which we have been showing since months, about what this summit can do. And in the beginning, we said a fundamental transformation of the public discussion. And I think this is really taking place. And listening to David, I find it so fascinating that we not only have 140 countries doing their own National Food System Summit dialogues, because it's something they are requested to do, but they do it really in depth. In a small country like Nepal, we had more than a dozen decentralized food system summit dialogues to build up the national dialogue. There's a profound discussion going on in many, many countries of the world. And there's a mobilization around this topic and an understanding of the centrality of food system that I personally have been waiting for a long time. I mean, one of my pet issues, so to say, is soils. And I have never seen so much attention and understanding now how dramatic the loss of topsoils is, and also how big an opportunity land restoration is to lift people out of poverty, to create food security, to build water security, to bring really, and this sounds miraculous, but to bring precipitation back. Sounds like rainmaking, but the deeper I'm looking into land restoration, the more I see that this is really accurate, that, you know, it's not only that land cover is disappearing because precipitation is disappearing, it is also that if you build up land cover, precipitation is coming back. So I see a lot of momentum. We are not, and I said that in the previous answer, we are not a norm-setting summit. We are not here to present new norms, but this collective understanding, these big global community on food systems, thinkers and practitioners, and all of the local communities down to a city and village level, I think we will see a lot of movement from there, because one of the key lessons here is this is an all of society effort. It takes horizontally all of the government, it takes vertically all levels of governance. Christine spoke earlier about territorial approaches, etc. I think this is really coming together and people understand the extreme urgency of turning around our food systems, but also things like how simple it is at times. It's not big technology, it's not science fiction techno fixes. It is basically social coherence. It's bringing communities together, making people talk, finding a common purpose. And we see this going on. So I'm quite hopeful that this will leave a dent in how we are dealing with food systems.
Thank you so much, Martin. I would also invite other action track chairs or levers of change, anything to add, because it's a challenge that we have to tackle together. So please open microphone and chip in.
I'm going to jump back in again. I'm reading through the Q&A about the CFS. To me, the summit is a moment in time to catalyze the achievement of the SDGs. The Committee on World Food Security is a long-standing process that we have all worked so hard to get right and to maintain its legitimate space on the platform. But the CFS, as we know, focuses on food security and nutrition. That's its mandate. So when Zhao is talking about nature and climate, the UNFCCC has to be included. When we hear Action Track 2 talking about nature and health, that's the World Health Assembly. When I'm talking about labor rights, those are other bodies too, which we've mentioned. So it's really important that all of us realize all the processes that are being impacted by the Food System Summit, and that we ensure that accountability and the follow-up is stretched across all these processes. It's not just food and nutrition, it's labor, it's the environment, it's all these other things. So help us get it right. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I think I just wanted to reiterate what Christine is saying, because what we have seen is how much this UNFFS process has brought groups together that otherwise were not speaking to each other around food systems, but also how it has galvanized action and communication at local level, because to see governments coming together and discussing with private sector, with civil society, with producers about their national pathways to food systems transformation. This is not something we have seen at the scale that we are seeing it today. On Thursday, we are coming together as the Africa Union, the 54 countries, to discuss a common position for food systems transformation. So there is a mobilization that this process has led to at a scale and depth that we haven't seen before, where we're talking accountability, where we're talking roles of different stakeholders and how we can all come together to transform our food systems and then be accountable to delivering that transformation by 2030. And I think this is very, very important, a really important achievement of this process.
Thank you so much. Any other final words from action tracks or levers of change? No, great. Thank you everyone for this fantastic discussion. So I'll now move on back to Martin again for the final remarks for the concluding this session.
Well, basically I have been saying since 1 year the same thing again and again and again. And that is, please do participate. And I'm saying the same thing now for the pre-summit. It's coming up. Registration is live. We need you in there. We need your critical voices. We need your questions. We need your participation. The more, the merrier. I think we are really into something with a 3-day pre-summit, bringing all of the expertise. And, you know, if I'm using a food system image, we went fishing with more than 2,000 ideas. We are coming back with the combined genius solutions that we have found all over the planet. And, you know, again, more often than not, simple social solutions, people talking to each other, giving those people a voice who are least heard, women, indigenous, peasants, rural farmers, fisher folk, forest dwellers, what have you, and finally bring it together. One, you know, very strong thing that has been coming out over the last month is how incredibly precious indigenous techniques and technologies are. All the hundreds and thousands of years of knowing how to work the land and, you know, to prevent forest fires. All of this is not something that our ancestors didn't deal with it. So bringing this all together needs your voice. So I would encourage you again to register, to make that your summit, to take the solutions, but also, and that's important, to register on foodsystems.community to be part of the many, many discussions that are there, because disagreement is part of the game. And, you know, if we are talking about issues like restoration, there are different methodologies out there. There is dispute about numbers, but this is constructive and this is helpful. So please do register on Food Systems Community, follow on Twitter, and be a part of the pre-summit so we can really capture everything that's out there. And we are looking forward also to listening to those who have chosen not to work inside this process. And we have the door wide open to listen what has been coming out then on the other summit that CSM has been organizing. So with that, thank you everybody for participating. Thank you also to all of our panelists, and a huge thank you to our super moderator, Yukiko. Fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Food is more than just what we eat. The ways in which we produce, process, and consume food touches every aspect of life on this planet. It is the foundation of our cultures, our economies, and our relationship with the natural world, and has the power to bring us together as families, communities, and nations.
Families and children are on the brink of famine.
But today's food systems are fragile and unequal. When they fail, there are ripple effects around the world, and the pandemic has impacted the most vulnerable among us. But we know what we need to do to get back on track. We have an opportunity to build back stronger than ever. Transforming our food systems is possible and necessary, and we can set a course to make real change for the benefit of all people. By bringing together key players from around the world and giving voice to citizens in every country. Because a strong food system means
no matter your race, no matter your class, no matter where you live,
women and men have equal opportunities to produce and access nutritious food,
which promotes human health at every step
without degrading land and water resources.
Significa una agricultura familiar.
Provide us, the community, with stability.
All year round, every month, every day of the week.
Even during a pandemic.
We are all connected, and we all have a responsibility to act. We must be bold. We must think and act differently. Transforming our food systems is the most powerful action we can take to solve our biggest problems. Because together,
we can build a just and resilient world.
A just and resilient world
where no one is left behind.
Where no one is left behind.
Where no one is left behind.
Where no one is left behind. Join us today